Seated. Well, thank you all for singing so robustly our For All the Saints hymn. It took me back to a time, and I remember it because it was just after September the 11th in 2001, and I happened to attend the All Saints service at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., and that was their processional hymn. They had all the bells and whistles out that day. The choir was huge, and the censers, they put incense in these thurifers, and they began to swing them up and down the aisles. And the more they swing them, the more they smoke. The idea and the understanding was that the smoke would ascend, taking our prayers to heaven and to remind us of the magnificence of God. And so they came in singing that song in the National Cathedral. And its aisle is so long. I don't know, it must be 4 or 5 lengths of our back window. And they were singing and singing. Do you know, y'all thought the 6 verses that we have in the United Methodist hymnal were a lot? I'm pretty sure there are 10 verses in the Episcopal hymnal. And they kept singing. And I noticed that the choir when they went in, they didn't just quit when they got to the front of the church. They began to go down the side, and then they would come back down the side aisle. Sometimes they would split up. Sometimes they would stay together. And then they would meet in the back again, and then they would go back in, singing all the while. And then their organist, talented like Susan, played this huge interlude in between, and they kept processing and kept swinging. Thoroughfare just going, smoke beginning to fill the nave of the great cathedral. They did that for, I think it was either 2, at least maybe 3 interludes, and all 10 verses. I felt like I needed windshield wipers on my eyes. It was beginning to remind me more of an old school Waffle House before we did away with smoking than a cathedral. And I'm, just a country boy from Stokes County. I get smoke. It doesn't bother me that bad. But that filled the room. And at the same time, I remember those words, for all the saints. Hallelujah, hallelujah, coming through that magnificent cathedral. Seeing the mystery of what was going on. It was a real mystery for me, little Methodist. Wafting the prayers to heaven. I always love these little architectural decals, decoration in our sanctuary. Every one of them. We had similar pattern in my seminary. One of the preachers once said when they were talking about the great cloud of witnesses that they thought that those things were all monastic monks sitting there in their hoods worshiping with us that had come before. Oh, I think it's fitting. Yeah. Today is All Saints Sunday, a day in the church in which we remember and give thanks for the lives of those, especially our members in our church, that have died since last All Saints Day. But also we remember those that have been in our life, family and friends, loved ones that have been special to us, and that they too have passed either this year or the years before. The day of All Saints Day is a day in which we remember and give thanks for their presence in our lives, and that God has received them into God's care, to care for them, to let God's perpetual light and love shine upon them, to offer them the perfect, the good, and the holy. Wow, that's a lot to do, preacher. And yet, that's what the church teaches us. There is a part of faithful living that is full of mystery. Like we don't fully understand a lot of things that are theological. I mean, there's tons and tons of books and papers and speeches and sermons and songs. When we get down to it, there's a lot of it that's still a mystery. I think there's a part for us in our lives that changes us in our understanding from the mystery, or from the understanding and the full knowledge of what's going on, into acceptance of the mystery of what God is doing and has done and will continue to do for us and in our world. Oh, we may not get everything right, may not fully understand it, and yet at the same time, our dependence upon God and who God is for us and for the world continues to grow and shape and swell up in our being. That a dependence less upon ourselves and more upon God grows. I did a little math. Some of you've gotten a letter from me this week with your statement of giving and your support of Congregation Church, and I said in there that we will remember these saints that have given 250 plus years to our congregation, to combined total. I did a little closer math recently, and let's see here. I did this. This is good. Daggone it, I've already... Well, I did some math, and it was well over 350 years instead of 250 years. I looked it up this morning, and Skeet Dedman joined in April of 19... No, that's not right. Ruth Richardson joined in 1941. Lorena joined in 1935. Anna Mae in 1935 as well. And Skeet joined in 1934. That's a long time to be a part of College Place. All their lives, and most of it, in a lot of ways, and a big portion of their life was here. 350 years. I mean, and that doesn't even, others that have come and added to over the years. I mean, what a gift to be in God's service for that many years. Now, I just have to say one thing, and if you here at a funeral for me, I will say that what we remember at a funeral is not the worst of what somebody does, because there's absolutely positively no one is perfect, ever. I say this taking comfort that at some point it'll be said at my funeral. None of us are perfect, ever. And yet what God does is God focuses on the best that we can be, allows us to grow, forgives our faults, and inspires our faithfulness, our hope, and our trust in the future. That we focus on the best of what these who have come before us offer, not on the worst. That's really not a bad way to live life. The more and more I think about it, I mean, there's a lot going on in the world, and it wouldn't take too long to get too miserable too quick, if you really pay attention and follow. I went out yesterday. It was a nice day. Most of you know I've got a little MGB that's about 4 months older than I am, 1976. And I thought today is a perfect day to ride in the MG. So I took off. I said, I'm going to ride out to the airport and back. Well, I go over there, and at Green Valley, and I go leave my house and go down Green Valley and going to turn left on the Benjamin Bryan Boulevard, whatever you want to call it, right in there. And there is some young whippersnapper behind me in some automatic car, and I take off, and it pops out of first gear, and so I'm going, Roo! So I did this little lunge forward, and I'm kind of going, well, guess what he decided he was going to do? Blow the horn. I was like, you better just stop it. You don't even know what I'm doing up here. They say now that we could save the world, and you could leave the keys in the ignition of a manual transmission because nobody knows how to drive it. It'd be safe. But anyway, so I got in gear and took off. I was like, well, that car you're driving probably won't be around this long as this one has. Which is good and bad. I mean, he's probably a lot more green than mine is. But popped out of gear and he was blowing the horn. I was like, you little snot. I just went on. And I said, self, why did you react like that? I mean, did it change anything? And even though he blew his horn at you and you laid on the horn on the MG and it's like, meh, I mean, it's scary. More like Halloween than a robust automobile. Anyway, so I got going, but I said, self, is that really the way you want to live? I think part of what All Saints' Day does for us is allows us to confront our own lives where we find ourselves. And as we remember and give thanks for the legacy of those who've come before us, causes us just to ponder just a little bit, what will our legacy be? And how are we living in saintly fashion? In Richmond, we had go to Centenary Methodist Church downtown from time to time. Oh, it was kind of neat. You go into the main door and you went up this flight of stairs, and then you went in the main door again, and then you went up another flight of stairs. And when they built it, they were thinking, church should happen in an upper room like Jesus and the disciples for communion. So many steps. Maybe that's what they were trying to communicate with us in these steps. In the upper room. And the preacher, he was good. He was neat. He was better than I was. He'd go out and stand on the sidewalk and greet people vested in worship. If you didn't know what was going on, you didn't know what was happening. He'd come in. He started almost every worship service that I went to that church with. He'd say, "Good morning, saints." There'd be 2 or 3 that say morning back. And everybody's like, "Oh, I ain't really a saint." And he'd get around with the rest of us. He'd say, "Good morning, sinners." And I'm like, that's the same group of people. Part of us, I guess, there's the saint in us and there's the sinner part of us. And sometimes in today's culture, we have a tendency to focus on the sin side, where we fall short. And, if we can't come up with it ourselves, there's plenty of people around that'll just point out our failures real quick. And yet, at the same time, all of us, within us, because of God's grace and God's goodness within our lives, are saints as well. That the goodness that resides within us, that the love and the grace and the hope and the trust of Christ that resides within us fills up. It swells and goes forth into the world. Our God is a forgiving God. The things that we don't get right, God forgives. God lays those aside. We're the ones that keeps up with them. Let them go. Oh God, help me be the person you have created me to be more faithfully, stronger, to allow me to hope in you and not only in myself. Oh, godly living. It's a challenge. We don't always get it right, and that's okay. There's always another day. There's always the chance. There's always the process of getting better, growing more and more like God. Not that we're not good enough, but that we grow and we become more and more like Christ who lives in us through God's Spirit. All Saints is not just about the past. It's not just about remembering those who've gone before. It's about remembering the best of their life. To mimic those saints that have been in our lives that we can reflect into the world. That's the task before us. The best that they offered, we offer to the world. And we continue to grow and shape our lives to allow God to change us. To allow God to open us up. One of my professors, E. Glenn Henson, used to say that part of what we do is like a flower opening before the sun. Y'all know, some of you have heard me say this. I love, once in a while, I'll get a little bloom when there's plenty of blooms on the little rose bushes. And I'll say, I'm just going to see what I can make out of this bloom. And you grab some of those leaves and you start pulling it. And that ain't nothing but a mess. You just wasted the bloom. And yet, with just a little time, with the sunshine, with the growth, with some fertilizer, with a little nurture and sustaining, water, Flower begins to grow and open, and it forms the most beautiful, radiant flower. It offers nurture and sustaining, encouragement. Changes us. When we allow God to work in our lives, not when we pressure, when we push, when we pull, when we force, but when we slowly grow closer and closer to God over the years. Our reflection in the world looks different. This text for today, it's this Sermon on the Plain, the Beatitudes, that Jesus offers. It's offered also in Matthew. It's longer, it's different. In Luke, it comes with some woe. Woe to you who are rich. Woe that you do laugh. Woe. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be easy. And it reminds us that those who hear that are blessed, will be strengthened, will be changed, be encouraged, can grow in faith and on the way. Day in and day out, that's what it is. When we wake up in the morning, it is our free will, our choice to make how we'll live the day, how we'll react, how we'll respond. It's what it is. It's part of this free choice, this free grace that's been given to us. How will we respond? In a Christ-like manner or human nature? How is it that we can grow more and more like Christ each day? The waters of baptism that we receive in baptism enables, as the classic line says, that it cancels the power of sin in our lives. I love it. It doesn't mean there won't be sin in our lives. It won't means that there will be distractions, but it cancels the power of sin. It loses its power, its control. It loses its ability to control us. The grace of God swells up in its place. We move on, do something different. When we gather around this table, we receive the bread and the juice that we're reminded of the body and blood of Christ with us, that nurtures us and sustains us, that the Spirit of Christ goes with us, that we're reminded of the power of forgiveness at the table, and we're reminded of the power of the resurrection. Do this in remembrance of me. Remembrance of the things that has gone on, the creation, the love, the forgiveness, the things that are going on, the fact that we're not left alone in the world, that Christ is there with us as a tangible sign. We're being reminded in the bread and the juice. And to be reminded to do this in remembrance of me and the promised return of Christ in the world. The fixing of all wrongs. The changing of our world. The wrongs in our world will be made right. The new heaven and the new earth is revealed. All that's what we're doing when we come to this table for a little piece of bread and a little bit of juice. Through the power of God's Spirit at work in the world. People of faith, go forth into the world to let your light shine in the world, to bring the brightness of God into all that you do and all that you see. All glory, honor, and power be to the one who was, who is, and who is to come. Amen.